not like I'm a rule breaker.
Yeah.
I might be a ground breaker and I might be a trendsetter, right? But, I just like to have that independence.
Welcome back to the Personal Success Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Watts, and today's episode is an absolute gift. Christine Coyne is a proud Bibbulmun Noongar woman and a true groundbreaker. For over 30 years, she has worked at the intersection of Aboriginal engagement, cultural awareness, and leadership development across Australia's largest industries. And that's from mining and construction to government and community. But her story isn't just one of professional success, it's one of fierce independence, cultural pride, and visionary leadership. From walking away from a secure role to start her own consultancy to build over 15 programs that empower both Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, Christine has lived what she teaches. In this conversation, we talk about trailblazing without burning out, balancing both worlds, creating culturally safe workplaces, and what it means to lead with integrity, resilience, and deep purpose. Christine doesn't just teach transformation, she truly embodies it. So let's get into it. All right, Christine Coyne, thank you so much for joining us on the Personal Success Podcast.
Thanks, Ryan. Good to be here.
Tell us your story.
For the viewers over there, so I'm an Aboriginal person, so that means I'm native to Australia, and I've always worked in Aboriginal employment, education and training, and primarily up until the age of, I think, my early 50s, I've always worked for companies, like doing engagement stuff. And then I got to a point where I really wanted to do my own thing and pretty well map my own course, I guess, and pretty much develop things that I think were missing out there, you know, as far as the space that I work in. And then also get a little bit more innovated around, you know, things for the future. So I guess for me that started in 2013 formally.
Yeah. And so I remember when we first spoke, I was really struck by this story of you worked for a consultant, right? And you were kind of challenged, right, to kind of, you know, go on your own a little bit, right?
Yeah. So what happened was I was working. I had always planned to work for myself at some point, but I knew I had to do it when I was ready. And because I'm a single person, I don't have anyone else's income to rely on. So I had to make sure that not only was I ready mentally, but also ready financially. So ready to, you know, ride big waves and come crashing down every now and then. A friend of mine offered for me to go and work for him in his consultancy firm. So he provided a range of different services, but he didn't have anybody that did specialise in Aboriginal engagement like myself. So I agreed. And, you know, for the first 12 months, everything went relatively well. And then in the second 12 months was, I think, globally, we were heading into a bit of a global financial crisis. And so things started slowing down, getting a little bit frustrated, as most business owners do. There were times when I'd sort of walk into my office and there's this little yellow envelope sitting on my desk on a Monday morning. Not what anybody wants to see on a Monday morning, especially not an envelope with your name on it. Because it kind of probably gives all sorts of feelings of dread and, oh my God, what's this? And then when I opened up the envelope, there's a P&L and, you know, highlighting this and highlighting that. We were already having a weekly meeting and we were discussing what was going on and what was coming in and how the pipeline was going and all that sort of stuff. And so I kind of, you know, that was pretty annoying. So I let him know. But he obviously ignored that first signal and he did it again. So I sort of just said to him, I said, look, I'm out there paving the concrete. I'm bringing in work to your company. You're making a lot of money off what I do for your company, regardless of how much I'm making for myself. And I said, so, you know, I think you need to sort of tone it down a bit, Holder. I work for you as a consultant and that's it. So for you to put these little notes on my desk and expect me to respond well, probably not a good idea. So it wasn't very long after that I decided, now that's it, I'm about to jump ship. And I had no plan.
Yeah. It's the best way to do it, huh?
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, jump in with the sharks.
Yeah, so this person, you were doing really all of the work that was leading to income for this person's business. And you kind of figured that out. And you said, you know what, this is not good enough for me. I'm going to do something different.
Yeah, well, so I basically said to him, I've decided I'm going to go out on my own. He was the only person that said, oh, you'll never make it. It's pretty tough out there. You're making a mistake. And I just said, oh, well, we'll just see what happens. Everybody else in my friend circle and business circle said, that's great. It's about time. They were all encouraging. And he was the only one that was negative. What happened was I actually formally resigned because I was on a consultancy agreement with him, so obviously I had to follow the process. And then a week later he came up to me and he said, so what are you doing? And I said, I already told you, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
He said, oh. So he thought that there might be some miracle and that I'd change my mind, right? And I said, look, I'm not saying that I don't want to work with you anymore. What I'm saying is that if we're going to continue to work together, the arrangement is going to change. And so if you want to subcontract me, you can subcontract me. But what that effectively meant for him was that he would make less profit that way and I would make more money, right? And he wasn't happy about that. So,
sure.
Yeah, so kind of the end of that friendship.
Yeah. So there you are, Christine. You have no plan, right? Yeah. You just kind of decided to jump ship, but you saw something there, right? That was going to be lucrative for you, or you saw a path. And what did you do then?
So then what I did was I just contacted all my networks and told them what I was doing. So I got myself set up first and foremost, right? I already had an ABN and I already had everything at home in terms of equipment. So all I really needed to do was get a business card together and eventually get a website, which I probably did 6 months later. But I just got out there and started looking at different tenders that might be available, networking with people, and that was it. Most of the work that I generated in the first 3 years were probably all through my networks.
Yeah. Yeah, so your idea at the time and the kind of work that you were in, right? You were kind of doing a sort of personal development / training for companies. How would you explain that?
So basically, at that time, I was delivering cultural awareness for many companies and also many personal development programs for Aboriginal people, non-Aboriginal people, and I was also doing mentoring workshops. So there was probably about 4 or 5 things that I was already doing in terms of delivery.
Yeah.
With all of those deliveries, those programs I'd written and developed myself.
Yeah.
So I knew the content, the IP was mine, and so I just went out to market with that. And I think now I've probably lost count, but I think I must have like over 10 to 15 programs now that I deliver.
Really?
And that's growing over time. So over time, what I've done is I've looked at where's the gaps, what else can I do to enhance what I'm doing, what else can I do to, generate more interest, right? And I guess, it's more watching the market.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the terms that you used, which, it wasn't something I was familiar with when we first connected, and that was, and maybe you could explain it to those of us in the West who are listening, and it was this idea of Aboriginal engagement.
Yes.
Give us some idea of what that means culturally for you.
So in Australia, we have what's known as native title, right? And so native title came about in 1991, formalised in 1992. So what that meant was big companies, major resource companies like Shell, Woodside, BHP, in order to continue to work on country that was traditional custodial countries, where that was subject to native title, in order for them to continue to work on that country, they had to have agreements in place with the land owners, right? And the land owners, so the opposite to where you come from would be Native Americans. So Aboriginal people are, brother, sisters to Native Americans. So they're Indigenous to America, we're Indigenous to Australia. Primarily, through their agreements, they have to provide opportunity. So there's some part of the agreement that provides royalties, and there's another part of the agreement that says you must provide the opportunity for people to get jobs and for businesses to be engaged, and you must also educate your workforce around whose country they're on and who are the traditional custodians of that land.
Yeah.
So, and because I'd had a lot of experience doing that at a senior level, that kind of gave me a bit of an edge.
And so you grew up as a Bibbulmun Noongar woman?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Where does that come from? And how does that shape what your journey here with this Aboriginal engagement?
So in Australia, there are probably around 200 to 300 different Aboriginal language groups, and each language group comes from a certain region. So Noongar people are the traditional custodians of the southwest of Western Australia, which includes from Jurien Bay, which is up above Perth, where I am living at the moment, and all the way down to the bottom. Noongar people occupy a large landmass, right? And within that landmass are 14 different language groups. And so the language group that I descend from is Bibbulmun and also Menang, which is Albany Mount Barker. So the first part is Noongar Nation, and then the next part is language groups within. I guess as I got older and started to realise what had happened throughout history, because obviously as a young person I didn't really understand what had happened, right? But the older I got and the more I got to know about it, then the more I got to realise, the impact that had and the position that left Aboriginal people. So much like the position that Native Americans have been left in, and other countries where, the dominant culture have, overtaken certain places and particularly mistreated some groups of people. And I guess knowing that my mother or my aunties and uncles, because my mother was one of 18 born, 15 surviving. My grandmother is also Noongar on my mother's side. My grandfather is also Noongar on my mother's side. And they were, they lived through that history. And so fortunately for me, the time that I was born, I escaped most of that. So whilst things weren't perfect, things were nowhere near to that extreme. So I think the more that I learnt about it and the more that I appreciated my life, the more that I wanted to be part of that, creating better opportunities for other people. So that's pretty much how it came about. So it was
so it sounds like there was something that you really connected with personally that kind of showed you something about having a certain gratitude about your life that kind of maybe it sounds like it almost inspired you to want to kind of share that and provide that experience for other people.
Yeah, so I wanted to be able to. So from a female point of view, I wanted to be a role model for not just Aboriginal women, but for all women, right? Firstly, to say that it's okay, right, for a woman to have a career. It's okay for a woman to be independent, and it's okay to get married and have children and not have to stay home for the first 5 years while the husband goes to work, right? And, then that's okay, right? And I remember when I was going back to work the second time, I'd had a year off on maternity leave, and then I had another year off on a part-time leave, and then by the second year I'd gone back full time. But I remember the first day I was going back to work and my ex-husband said to me, I don't know if I like this idea about you going back to work. And I said, well, you don't get a choice. I said, because you're my husband, you're not my father. And that was it. I went to work. And I'll tell you what, thank God I did that, because you never know where you're going to end up, and fortunately for me, it's taken me to where I am now. It's put me in a position where I live a comfortable life. I'm able to support my daughter and my grandkids, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I had not gone back to work at that point.
It seems like there's just something kind of, in just speaking with you for the brief time that we've had, there's something in you that's like a trailblazer that just kind of like, it doesn't matter what kind of the current construct is or whatnot. There was a certain way that you saw things, and whether you were a woman, wherever you came from in the country, there's a certain way that you just kind of stepped into a role to make that kind of manifest, right? And so I wonder, is that something that's always been there in Christine? Like when you think back to when you were a little girl, or is it something that kind of you gained over, maybe it was that incident with the consultant that you worked with? Has that always been there?
I think it's always been there. I think I was born like that. But I always was very strategic, right?
Yeah, so like you were a smart rebel.
I was a smart rebel, right?
Yeah.
Unlike kids today, I actually enjoyed school and I enjoyed high school, but there were times that, I probably slacked off a little bit. And so what I would do is like just before the end of the year and just before you started doing all your exams, I'd start being really good and I'd start doing much better work. And then on my report, they would say that, I've improved so much and, this semester's been great. And so they thought I was just getting better and better.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so, yeah.
So, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I've always been someone that I like to think for myself. I don't like being told what to do. And it's not that I probably don't like being told what to do, but it's not like I'm a rule breaker.
Yeah.
I might be a ground breaker and I might be a trendsetter, right? But, I just like to have that independence.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're sort of explaining there. It sort of is kind of what entrepreneurship is, right? You're not necessarily a rule breaker.
Yeah.
You're a groundbreaker. I think that was really profound the way you put that there. And one of the ways, as I was going over your website and looking into the information that I thought really illustrates this point is you've got this workshop called Indigenous Women in Leadership. And this workshop sounds incredible.
Yeah.
What could you tell us about that workshop?
So the Indigenous Women in Leadership is something that I developed because unfortunately women in general and particularly Indigenous women, right, sometimes never see themselves as, so I don't know how they refer to it over there, but you often refer to like the glass ceiling, right?
Yeah, sure.
Women go so far and men go above, and there's this disparity, between males and females. And I don't think that, when someone talks about that, I don't necessarily agree with it's a deliberate disparity. I believe that women go in expecting to get less. And so this is about getting people to understand. So it's about building up capacity, teaching women to be more confident in themselves, using strengths-based activities and talking about strategies like, what are the things that you need to do to propel yourself up, right? But also when we talk about leadership in community, so when you talk about leadership in a general term, right, in a broad term, there's connotations to being a leader. But when you talk about being a leader and you come from a community, an Indigenous community per se, then the leadership doesn't stop when you finish work.
Yeah.
The behaviour and those traits have to stay with you 24/7. That's something that people need to be mindful of. But I think in general it was more about creating opportunities to get women to see the opportunity to get further. They push themselves to become better. And often women and I'm not saying all women, but it's like this thing, they say this disparity between males and female payrolls, right, is a deliberate thing. It's a male thing. It's a male-dominant thing, right? But at the same time, how many women actually have enough courage to stand up and say, well, either you pay me this much or I don't want the job anyway.
Yeah.
Right? And that's more what I would say, right? So when I walked away from the job that I had with my friend as a consultant, even though I was a consultant, I was on a relatively good salary, right? And probably not a salary that most people would walk away. And he was just gobsmacked, right, that I was leaving. And I had nowhere to go. Like, in his mind, he was just like,
who would do this? Yeah.
Who would do this, right? She must be losing her marbles.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very clear, Christine, that there's a deep belief in this kind of, that all, like, it's a glass ceiling, right? It's glass. It's breakable, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful. I think growing up as, in the West as a white male, it was hard for me growing up to understand some of these issues. And I think I was always attempted to be empathetic to it. But now I have several clients I work with who the belief is it's inset in them. They're like, they're not looking for a woman. They're not, and I see it everywhere. They're not looking for a woman who's 30. They're not looking for a woman who's 50. They're not looking for a woman, and it's always the woman part of it is kind of it's in that core belief, So do you see a lot of that in some of the women that you work with?
I guess to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, I think you've got to be, people believe that successful women need to be aggressive, right? And that's not the answer. You need to be sure of yourself. You need to be confident. You need to be more, not aggressive, more affirmative, right? In your beliefs and about how you go about your business. And I think it's all about, language as well, right? So, and if we look around the world today, we probably don't have as many women in high-level positions, but we're starting to see more and more women elevated up, into into corporate boards, and I mean like big corporates.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, what you said reminds me of the psychological experiments that they did where they would have, you know, a woman say something sort of assertively and then like a male. And they would have, you know, respondents kind of grade what the response was like. And it often came up that the woman was being, you know, quote unquote bitchy or, you know,
aggressive.
mean. Whereas the man was just saying, well, he's the boss. He's got to be a little assertive.
Yeah.
And so there's that perception there that people have to deal with a bit.
Yeah. But I guess it's like, in order to change the status quo, you have to believe that it can change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Because if you don't believe it, right, it's never going to happen.
Yeah. And I think that's what's really clear that really shows up in your work is that there was a really clear belief here that was breaking ground, right? Not breaking rules, but breaking ground. I really love what you said there.
Yeah.
So in some of the material that I saw on your website and the courses that you teach, there's this idea of balancing both worlds and how this is critical for Aboriginal employees. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I think it's like, so the concept of that is that, so if we think about Indigenous people versus non-Indigenous, right? Or if we think about people from cultural groups where culture is still strong and culture is collective. So, you know, there's two kind of broad definitions of cultural groups, right? And some come from what you would call collective and societies, and others come from what you would call individualistic, which would be more Western, right? So you're encouraged to be an individual, you're encouraged to take care of yourself, you can share with others if you want to, but it's not expected. Whereas when you're part of the collective, if you have more than others, then you're expected to share. You're not meant to be seen as an individual, you're not seen first and foremost as an individual, right? And so sometimes when we're going to work and you come from a culture that kind of strongly shapes your personality, right? So for me, how does culture define me? It's how I see, it's how I think, it's how I react, right?
Yeah.
And then does it impact on me at work? Of course it does, right? So there are things that when you go to work that are part of your culture that you can take with you, and there are things that you can't. And so we call that balancing both worlds, right? Yeah. So, and to probably, in a comical sense, like I say to people is that, you know, people say, you know, there's this big thing now about diversity and inclusion and everybody being culturally safe at work and everybody's got all these policies. Some people put those policies into practice and some people don't, right? And there are organisations that truly believe that every single person that works at their organisation can bring their whole self to work, right? Well, I disagree with that, right? Because like what I say to people is that when I'm at work, I'm in my 9 to 5 personality.
Yeah.
And I'm not at work, I'm in my after 5 personality. And those two personalities are very different, right? Because I'm parked up some of my culture at work and I'm fully myself at home, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think everybody's the same, right? So balancing both worlds is about teaching Aboriginal kids who are already working or young people, even young adults, right, that, you know, when you go to work, there's got to be some compromise. There's going to be some give and take. There are going to be things that you're going to have to sacrifice, right? Because there's no culture that works that doesn't sacrifice something, right? Either personally or, you know, as a parent, right? And that's why now everybody's looking for a work-life balance because they've realised that they're always at work and they're not spending any time with their family. So it's about how do you balance all of that? How do you keep all of that intact? And some of that's about, you know, knowing yourself, who you really are, where you want to be, and where are you working? Is it authentic to your beliefs, right? Because if you're not happy at work, that normally means that you're not being authentic to yourself. Your values are not aligned to the place that you're going to work at. Yeah. If your values aren't aligned, but it's also about building up strengths, right? So in that workshop, I also talk about making sure that people understand employer expectations, manager expectations, and then secondly, setting goals, right? So if you're going to go to work every day, you want to have a few goals, right? And many people don't have goals, right? just wake up and go to work, and they get paid and they spend their money, and they don't think about, they think about next week. They don't think about, 10 years down the track. And then I also incorporate stuff around team building, the importance of teams, right? But what's your part in a team, right? Because if we think about the concept of bringing groups cultural proficiency or at its best, which is everybody working harmoniously together, everybody's got a part to play in that, So it's everybody understanding what their role isn't part of that as well. It's also looking at strengths. So a lot of times when Aboriginal people coming into the workplace, much like women, right? So this will be males and females in some cases. People are coming in feeling inferior, right? Not superior, right? So I use strength-based activities for them to recognise, well, what are the skills have you used already to get to where you are? So therefore you do have skills. And then secondly, what are the skills that you need to develop to get to where you want to be next? So where do you want to be next, and what skills do you need to develop so people start to get that futuristic planning process?
Yeah. It's interesting. You talked a little bit about people when you work with them. It's like, is the company aligned with their values about who they really are authentically? Do you do anything in your work to kind of explore what that looks like for them? Because that's a lot of work that I do with people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond.
Yeah, so that's all part of the leadership training. I use a lot of that in the personal development. So for example, some organisations will say, well, I want to do half of this work, but could you add on a little bit of this, this and this? So then it's customised, right? And so it might be that, that would be part of it. But I particularly use it in the leadership personal development programs. So one is balancing both worlds. Two is the leadership training, and the other would be other personal development. So that, because sometimes people, they go to work, they stay at work because they get paid a reasonable amount, they've learnt to survive on it, and they don't challenge themselves, and then they become miserable. And the reason that they're miserable is they're not working at the right place. If you don't get up and you don't want to go to that place, or if you don't get up and you don't want to run your business, then you're in the wrong place, because that's not authentic to you. So if you work for an organisation and their vision and values are aligned to your vision and values, then you're being authentic and true to yourself. But if they're not, well, then you're not being true to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a beautiful way that you just put it there, because, even I think in my experience, that's what happened to me. I was like, well, I think this is what I want. I want to work this job. I want to, get to this point. I want to make this amount of money. And I was so wrong, and I started looking around being, when I figured this out, being like, I can't be the only one who experiences this. So I love that you're helping people understand that, it's like, wow, there's a clear values discrepancy between the company I'm working for and where I want to go. You're not in the right place, like you said.
Yeah. And
I think it's interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, and I think when I decided to leave my friend's consultancy business, that was when I first was there, everything was okay. I was happy being there. I was aligned to what he was doing. We had the same mindset. But then when things started changing and he started changing his behaviour, then that wasn't the environment that I was prepared to be in. And so therefore, that's why I left.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm curious if you do anything on the other side of that, like if you help people who are non-Aboriginal leaders with their responsibility in creating like a culturally safe workplace.
Yeah, so a lot of the training that I do, some is for non-Aboriginal and some is for Aboriginal, right? So, for example, this morning I did a 5-hour workshop for a company on cultural supervision. So the first part was cultural proficiency, cultural competency, understanding unconscious bias, implicit bias, understanding, the implications of bias, and then looking at intercultural communication, how communication is a big part of getting it wrong.
Yeah. It's so, I'm just going to say, it's so interesting to me how it's not something that's innate for human beings to be able to communicate well. It is a skill that many of us, and I'll include myself in this group, we had to work very hard to get adequate at it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is that So the next part of it is engaging, right? So, and that's what I say to people. So tell me what the difference is between communicating and engaging, right? Because people believe that it's one and the same, but it's not. So I can communicate with anybody, but whether they engage with me is determined by the way in which I communicate.
Yeah.
Do I speak the same language? Am I speaking to that person respectfully? Right? Am I displaying appropriate body language? Am I wearing the right clothing? So the whole concept of communication and engagement is looked as a verbal thing, when in actual fact, the biggest portion of communicating and engaging is non-verbal.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. We communicate mostly through our nonverbal communication, like body language and tone and things like that, right?
Yeah. That's right. And sometimes people don't actually realise it, right? Mm-hmm. And even, you know, just the notion of what you wear, right? You know, because sometimes when you're going to speak with someone, it's almost like a movie audition, right? What am I going to do to get this part, right?
Yeah.
You know, what do I need to do to get Orion to want to engage with me? And they're the things that you need to think about. And it's not a just dive in kind of thing. I mean, you can at times just dive in, right? But it's not like I'm diving in now.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting.
Diver.
It's interesting that you say that. I had a couple years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Italy, and I wore kind of, you know, very non-professional clothes. Now, I want to be very respectful to Italy's culture there. They're very much, the way I understand it is they really dress up for each other when they go out.
Mm-hmm.
You're walking the streets of Rome and whatnot, and everybody is sort of dressed up, you know, looks amazing. And I did not come ready for this. So as an American in Italy, I would go into places with just like a t-shirt and like jeans on. And I realized I was not getting the best sort of treatment. And I was like, what? You know, I immediately as an American was like, well, what's wrong with me? Then I realized I wasn't sort of respecting their, you know, there's kind of I'll look good for you. I'll present myself to you in this way. And it's amazing. I went to a store then and I bought like a nice sweater and like nice dress pants. And I went into another restaurant and was treated like gold, right?
Yeah.
But I think, you know, what I really understand there, and the reason why I thought of that now is because I was dressing in a way which made it easy for people to engage with me, right?
Yes, exactly. They probably thought you were just an English, a backpacker before that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about...
That's what I was saying about clothes are so important in communicating and engaging, and people don't even think about it. Why does it matter what I've got on, right? It does matter, especially when you're in someone else's country.
Especially, yeah. So tell me about the Woodside Pluto LNG project.
Right. Okay, so the Woodside also have another gas facility in Karratha. That's the Northwest Shelf joint venture that's been there for many years. And then neighbouring that, they decided to put another 2 trains in. And trains are not like choo-choo trains. They're like trains that extract gas out and bring it in to, you know, create more gas. And so that was a massive program. I think it was like 300 billion, right? And I think at the peak of the project, there was around 6,500 people. And because Woodside and the site that the Pluto project sits on, the traditional, so in that case, the land on which Pluto sits on was not subject to native title. Native title had been extinguished, right? And so what happened was there was a custodial agreement put in place where 5 local language groups formed and became an organisation called Murajuga, and they became the prescribed body corporate to manage all the engagement between the company and the development of the project and the land use and protecting sacred sites. So the way in which they designed the project meant that all of those significant areas and special areas would be protected. And that's what Aboriginal engagement is like the company engaging with the local community to make sure that things are done accordingly. 1, in terms of legal agreements, and 2, in terms of providing opportunities for training, employment and jobs. So I managed all of that. So at any one time on the project, there could be 10, 20, 30 different contractors. So Woodside was the client, and we were what was known as the EPCM, which is the Engineering Procurement Contract Manager. So we managed the project on behalf of the client, that being Woodside.
Yeah.
But it was one of the best jobs that I've had. And I guess one of the reasons that then actually propelled me to want to work for myself more, because what it meant was that, so on a daily basis, I could be in contact with 2, 3, 4 people from different companies. And I was always, working across different contractors. So I was engaging with people in different roles on a daily basis. And that's what I like.
Yeah. I wonder, what lessons did that experience teach you about creating real accountability in a corporate culture?
I think what was really good about Woodside is that they were actually committed to getting it right and doing it better, right, than they'd done it before. So, there was the Northwest gas shelf. That was a long time before that. They were a little bit more immature in terms of heritage management, engaging and all that sort of stuff. But they'd had that experience, right? And they've had a bit of a foothold in the community. Not that they're by any way means, at that point were, jumping leaps and bounds, but they were prepared to get it right. So they were prepared to put their money where their mouth was. So we were well resourced to get really good outcomes. Right.
Yeah.
And, it's like anything. You get good outcomes and everyone's saying, oh, that's great, but we could have got more. But that's because everybody always wants more.
Yeah.
But
sure.
I think at that point, the achievements that were made in terms of Aboriginal engagement were probably, really, really top class.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it sounds like that was a powerful experience that really kind of it revealed to you more about the work that you actually were here to do, in a way of saying.
Yeah. And I guess, because I was working with a variety of different people from different companies, every day was a different day, so, and that's what I really like now about working for myself, is that I don't get up and I don't get up at the same time and drive to the same place and spend the same amount of time there, day in, day out. I don't do that anymore. Yeah. And I don't ever want to do that again, right?
Yeah. That's not Christine.
That would be failure. Unless it was an opportunity that was too good to knock back.
Sure. So
for me, the opportunity to work on Pluto was a fantastic opportunity. I had to move away from home for 4 years, which is something I generally wouldn't consider for no reason. It would have to be a good reason. And it got me out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
I've leveraged off that opportunity and I turned it into a great experience. And that's the one thing that I say to people, is that sometimes when you're sort of going into the unknown, you get a little bit fearful and and that's because you're getting out of your comfort zone. But for me, if you don't get out of your comfort zone, you don't grow, you don't stretch, right? You stagnate, right? And you become complacent. Right? And then when you become complacent, you probably become bored and then you become irritable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like even though you knew you didn't want to do this 9 to 5, like there was a trade-off there. And did you say you were there for 4 years? Yeah,
I was there for 4 years. Then I came back to Perth. So.
Yeah. And there's a trade-off there. You went and kind of did the same thing for 4 years, but it was kind of like boot camp in a way. It showed you exactly what you wanted to do and gave you the connections to be able to do it.
And it was a massive responsibility. Like it was a big job. And it was working on a project, so I'd never worked specifically on a project, a mining project, and particularly that size. In that case it was gas. But there, as you'd probably be aware, there's many mining projects in Australia. And obviously there's also the same in America. So for me, it was a new experience all around.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, there's always that. There's always that intrepidation when you're doing something new. And it's like getting people to understand that that's normal, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, there's times when I've just sort of, got there and thought, what am I doing here?
Sure. Yeah.
That's just a little bit of self-doubt, right? But that's normal, right? And then you just say, okay, well, I'm either going to sink or I'm going to fly. So I've always chosen to fly and not sink.
Yeah, I think that's what you said there is powerful about you're supposed to be uncertain, right? And the self-doubt really is designed to put you back in your comfort zone, but growth doesn't happen unless you're outside your comfort zone, right? So it sounds like that was really your experience during that time.
Yeah, yeah. And I got to meet lots of really good people, lots of talented people. A lot of the people that work on a project like that, they're high-paid engineers, marine superintendents, civil engineers. I mean, a lot of the engineers that worked on the project were all expats, all from other countries.
Mm-hmm.
And to build a project like that is a massive. You have to have people that have really highly skilled, highly educated, been around the world. So I got to meet some really good people as well and expand my networks.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, I'm always networking, right? Just like you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. What we're doing right now. Yeah. So I want to shift our focus here, if that's all right. I want to kind of zero in on your training because, we talked a lot about, the Aboriginal engagement and, the work that you do to really empower women. But your programs, they go deeper than just training, right? You talk about mindset, about identity, about empowerment. So tell us about your training and how you pulled all these ideas together.
How did I pull it all together? Wow. Okay, so I guess it sort of transitions. So, like I said in the beginning, first it started off with cultural awareness, then it started, then I decided that when we think about cultural awareness in a major organisation, right, it has to be led from the top down. But when you think about the executives, their role in it is different to the role that would be at the management and senior executive level versus the group on the floor versus HR. So then what I did was I diversified and I delivered a range of programs. So one would be for the corporates, one would be for the leaders, and one for the HR and recruitment, and one for the bulk workforce. So it was targeted, right? So it was designed to be, the historical stuff would be the same, but the stuff at the end, so what are the things you can be doing moving forward, were designed to fit in with their role within the organisation and or the company. So, and then as time went by, then I started thinking more about the concept of cultural proficiency and cultural competency, which is more broader, right? So it's about because what I realised was that there was training that was being delivered to non-Aboriginal people and there was training that was being delivered to Aboriginal people, but nobody was bringing them together, right? And so cultural proficiency in practice, that's where it came from, right? And so that is a 3-day program. It works really well where organisations have a combination of non-Aboriginal and Aboriginal people and all people from different cultural backgrounds. There's 3 days. First day is non-Aboriginal. Second day is the second group. Then the third day, you bring everybody together. And when I did it for the first time, and you see the dynamics change when everybody's together, it's just incredible. Yeah. And at first you see this little them and us, right? And at the end of it, they're all hugging each other.
Yeah.
So it's like, you're telling someone about a problem that you've got, but you're not talking to the person that you've got the problem with.
Yeah.
So how are they going to hear you? How are they going to respect you if it's all coming in second hand, right? And when you put people in the room together, then they realise that we're not that different, There are a lot of things that we do are the same, and there's probably more similarities than there are differences. So that's where the cultural proficiency in practice came from. And then the supervisory stuff was understanding that, I don't know how it is over there, but in Australia, a lot of people go and get management qualifications and they become managers and stuff like that. But a lot of people transition from a certain position, and then the next thing you know, they're a supervisor, the next thing you know, they're a manager, and they haven't had any experience managing people, right? So it's about understanding, how to do it properly. And then I guess, the big thing about diversity and inclusion, so a lot of the stuff that I do fits in with making sure that everybody can go to work and feel comfortable. And so what that means is that sometimes training for one group needs to be different to training to another, and then sometimes you can bring everybody together. So I guess, everything that I'm doing is kind of in that. I guess the best way to explain what I try to do is I like to change people from the inside out.
Yeah.
And I like to change the way that they see things from the inside out. Whereas most people look at the outside and make a decision about that and transcend it, send it inside their mind, whereas I do it first.
Yeah, I think you describe sort of a transformation there that is kind of amazing. You take these two groups of people and you are able to put them together and then have them connect. What's the magic that's happening there that is causing that to happen?
I don't know. I must be magic.
You must be onto something.
I guess I've sort of, it's like the days that they spend apart actually prepares them for the days that they come together.
Yeah.
So there are some things that you need to, and it's about, making sure that by the time you get the both of those groups together, they're in the right mindset. And I think, it's about understanding if you can get people in the right mindset, then that's the key to the success.
Yeah.
For example, when I was talking today on the workshop that I did today, and we were talking about how the environment can impact on communication, right? So people think the environment, what's the environment got to do with communication? Right? So it's like when you're having those difficult conversations, right? And for a supervisor, one of the most difficult conversations is when you've got to performance manage somebody, or you've got to cancel them, or you've got to discipline them. And so I'd say to people, what I've always done in the past is I've always taken people away from the office, because normally when people are getting performance managed, they're always taken to this little room in little office. Everyone knows what goes on in that office. Everybody knows why is Ryan in that office. We know why Ryan's in that office, right? And so straight away, Ryan's not in a good space, right?
Yeah.
But if I take you out to another environment and say, let's go out and have a coffee, want to have a yarn with you, right? So then I take people out, give them a coffee, sit down, and then I first start talking to them about what they're doing really well, right? So make them feel good about themselves. And then I say, now I'd like to talk to you about things that I think we can improve on, right? Not you, we, right? And then therefore, I'm their manager, they're not working well, means I'm not working well, right? So therefore, this is a we problem, not a you problem, right?
Yeah.
So it demonstrates then that I'm going to help you, right? And we're going to work together to get to where we need to be, right? So there's a dual ownership. And so the trick is change the environment, change the response. You're going to be more comfortable in that environment taking a little bit of criticism after I've talked you up. You'd probably be even better about taking a little bit of criticism. Then secondly, change the language. So if I said, now I want to talk to things about I think you need to improve, rather than I think we need to improve on, the response to one scenario versus the other is very different.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. That's definitely in my corporate work. I did a lot of work with managers, and even myself when I was younger, I felt like I think when I was young, I felt like I had to be aggressive about it to sort of shut down any response they would have, which is, looking back, I can't even believe I'm saying that now. Right. But I mean, that's kind of what you did. And then because you would have these responses about, you're not good enough. And then I realized, oh, wait a second, as a leader, your job really is dependent on theirs. So instead of, kind of going from like this domination, it's like, how do we partner to fix this? Yeah. And what does that look like?
Yeah. And by doing it the way that I've described, you can then convert what started off as a performance management scenario into a performance development scenario because there's an improvement plan at the end of it.
Yeah, there's a key distinction there, is, performance management or development. I mean, development sounds, progressive. It sounds like it's moving in a direction.
Yeah. And, 9 times out of 10, that scenario would work well. You might fail a couple of times, but generally that would be better than being the dictator saying, well, this is your job and you're not doing it. And if you don't pull your finger, if you don't get it together, then you're not going to have a job, So, and I think, it's that people skills. So people don't always have the right people skills. That's not something that I don't think you can actually learn at a university. I think you can learn it through experience. So like you said, you've acknowledged it. I've acknowledged that I've made mistakes as well in the past. And then you improve it, right? So you don't see a mistake as a negative, you see a mistake as a positive because you learn more from your mistakes anyway.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's where most of the learning comes from. I always said, I have to learn everything, the hardest way. Yeah. And I think that I wasn't acknowledging the fact that most of us learn our most important lessons through like a big failure, So that's kind of the way things have to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I guess this is kind of a moonshot type of question, right? But in your experience with working with people, I imagine you've worked with several thousand people at this point in time. What do you think holds people back from true change? Like they want to change, but they don't. What is that thing?
I think people, sometimes people can't see they can't see past who they already are, right? Or they can't see the benefit, right? So a lot of people, they're in the status quo. They've always done things this way. It's always worked that way. So why should I change? But the thing is that if you don't change, things are going to change around you. And you're going to miss the boat pretty much. So, and I think people, are more. Some of that can be a cultural thing, right? Mm-hmm. Happy to stay, do things the way that they are because it's aligned to their culture and it's aligned to their values, and they don't see why they should change. I think it's more about understanding when you should change, right? So I guess the best concept of that is understanding code switching, right? So if we think about the concept of code switching, right, most people will say, like if you Googled it, you'd probably come up with they'd say something like, code switching applies to people of colour, right? And they believe that in order for them to be successful in the white man's world, they have to code switch, right? They have to be a different way, right? Whereas I don't believe that. I believe everybody code switches when they go to work. Like I said before, your 9 to 5 personality, your at-work personality, right? Yeah. And you should have that, right? You should have a different personality at work, right? Nobody should know much about you after work, only a selected few friends, right? And sometimes people mix it all up a little bit too much, right? And even managers, managers need to understand that you can't be friends with your team. If you got to lead them, you got to have a hands off. You got to be hands off. Yeah. And so, I guess in my experience, one of the biggest mistakes I've made is employing friends to come and work with. Never again. Yeah. Because you need to have boundaries, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, it just feels authentic sometimes if you're like, okay, wait, I'm being your friend now I'm being your boss. Or, I'm being your colleague now. It just feels like that doesn't compute when you just,
Well, I know we're friends, but are you okay with me being your manager? Yeah. But then when I've really got to be the manager, not so, yeah. So it can be difficult,
Yeah. So what about you, Christine? Like you're there's a personal development underpinning to all that you're doing here. Do you participate in any programs? What do you do for your personal development?
Mostly I read. I don't have time. I've done a lot of I guess other than my education at school, where I did a little bit of uni at Murdoch, and then I've done a lot of short soft skills training type courses. I've read a lot, Yeah. I've read a lot of books around, so I've got a real interest in natural medicines and natural health alternatives. I've got an interest in mind-body connection, and then which then actually, so mind-body also connects to mindset, connects to motivation, I think it was just by chance that I started reading about certain things. Sort of had a little interest in those kinds of things, but one thing just transcends into another, and in some ways they all interrelate, right? So if you think about leadership, right, you can run a leadership program. It can be a great program, but if you're not in the right mindset, you're not going to get the same amount out of that program as somebody that is in the right mindset, right? So you got to have, so that healthy body, healthy mind. So how does that help you work, right? Because they're all interconnected. Yeah. So I guess if you talk about what's the difference between a Western doctor versus a naturopath looks at things in a holistic way. Yeah. I guess in terms of my training, it's more an holistic way, right? Because it's not just about me teaching people something. It's about them having the mindset to take the information in and do something with it. And how do you do that?
You're a naturopath, or maybe you'd say you're into holistic medicine. So what led you to this idea?
So what happened was when I had my first child, I stayed at home for the first 5 years. So he never went to daycare when I went to work. Second time around, I only had a year off, and then the second year, my daughter went to daycare, right? So this was something that was new. And then every second week, I was picking her up, and they were saying, she's got a bit of a cough. And so I'd get an antibiotic. Another month later, I'd be going back again. And it started to get fortnightly, right? And I'm thinking, oh, my God, right? So then I go back, and he says to me, starting to sound bronchial, right? And I said, well, what is that? I didn't know what bronchitis was. We never had those things when we were kids. So he explained to me that bronchitis in children, so you can have like baby bronchitis, and sometimes it will then convert to childhood asthma, and then it will then convert to adult asthma. And in some cases, they might just get it once and then it will go away. But the worst case scenario is it'll go from that to adult asthma. And he said to me, would you like me to prescribe a Ventolin, right, which is a puffer? And I said, no, thank you. And he's just like looking at me. And I said, right, that's it. So I went off to the health shop. I bought a book for $1. It was like a little paperback, It's only about 20 pages. And I learnt so much in that book, right? And the number one thing that I learnt was that humans are the only animal species, because supposedly we're animals, right, that breed their infants for more than 6 to 8 weeks on milk.
Yeah.
And so some children are more prone to mucus-forming diseases, which then leads to things like asthma. So I took 80% of my daughter's dairy intake away, put her on a kid's multivitamin. That was it, problem solved. I progressed more and more into the subject matter.
That story really resonates with me because, cow's milk. I don't drink it because I noticed way later than I'd like to admit, maybe in my 30s, that if I drank milk, I would be like phlegmy the next day. Phlegm in my throat and my lungs, a little bit more difficult to breathe. I noticed kind of what you were describing.
Yeah, mucus forming, yeah.
I think it's because of the milk. I'm going to not drink that anymore, and really, I don't ever have any.
And the more that time progresses, the more milk changes. The quality of milk is not the same. I mean, I don't know what it was like when you went to primary school, but when we went to primary school, you had a bottle of milk on your desk every day, and it was like a little half-pint bottle with a little alfoil lid on it, and all the cream was sitting at the top. I mean, that was the way milk was. You can't get milk like that anymore, right? So now there's so much, a processing that goes on, and so that's the other thing that I've learned is what happens when food's processed, right? So, for example, the only oil that you should really eat is cold pressed olive oil, right? That is the best oil you can ever have, right? Because when the other oil, when it's hot pressed, it basically turns it into crap. And if you think about ice cream, this is what this little dollar book taught me, right? So you can imagine why I started doing a bit more research. Basically, ice cream is like thinners, right? It's like paint thinners.
Yeah.
And you think, oh my God, I mean, even I like ice cream.
Yeah.
I started to learn more and more about what happens to food when it's processed, what happens to food when it's got all those chemicals in it, and then what does it do to your actual mind, your skin, your health, your organs,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast, Christine, if we started talking about food.
Yeah, well, that's where I want to sort of try and get off the ground next. I haven't actually. Yeah. I've got that program ready to go. There were times when I was going to sort of try and get it out there, but I haven't. So the plan is that this year I'll get that off the ground and out on the street, so to speak.
Oh, that's interesting. What will that look like?
So that would be like a full-day workshop and actually teaching people to better understand how what you eat and what you drink affects your stamina, right? So particularly at work, which then means that your concentration is going to be better, which then improves your longevity, right? But also how it affects your mind. So how food, water is connected to your mind and your body. And so what you put in your body is going to determine how well you function physically and mentally.
So what are some things that you do, like maybe on a daily basis, that most people wouldn't do as far as your diet or things like that?
Okay, so mostly I drink alkaline water. So I don't drink water out of a tap. No. So I've got a water filtration system which basically alkalizes the water. So it's the closest you can get to pure spring water. I do a lot of juicing. Right. So, and I did that a lot through COVID. I kind of get a bit lazy when it comes to cooking, especially, now I live on my own. And so juicing is for me like a meal in a cup. And so, for example, this week I'll probably do beetroot and orange and carrot, right? So, or I might just...
Sounds really good to me.
Yeah. Well, and so beetroot is really good for heart health. Right? And it's really helpful for people that suffer from blood pressure. And carrot is really high in vitamin C, and it's really good for eye health. So about getting people back to basics. So I think what's happened over time is that if we think about, years ago, ideal, what do they call it? The Stepford wives, the man would go to work and the wife would be home all day, doing all the housework, and by the time he got home, dinner would be cooked and everything was fresh and homemade, and, there was none of, well, let's grab takeaway, or what are we having tonight? Let's get Chinese, And so if you think about what's a healthy diet, 80% it has to be alkaline and 20% can be acidic, right? The acidic stuff. And so, but what's happening now is people are eating the other way around. They're eating 80% acidic and 20% alkaline. And then they wonder why they feel like crap. They wonder why they're getting sick all the time, right? And, it's because it's what they're putting in their body. And you can blame it on COVID, or you can blame it on this, you can blame it on that. But the stronger your immune system is, then the more chance that you're not going to get those things. So I didn't get COVID, right? Because through COVID, my staple juice was broccoli, which helps break down plaque on the lungs, celery, again high in vitamin C, and hard green pear, which is a good source of fibre with the skin on it. And so it was about, connecting health and mind and work.
And it seems like you have no shortage of energy.
No, I haven't. Yeah.
I see that.
Yeah. Sometimes I get tired,
Yeah, every once in a while, right?
I've had a busy day.
So as we're wrapping up our conversation here, for anybody who's listening, who's in leadership or management or HR, what advice would you give them for changing the culture of an organization?
Call me. No, I'm joking. I think number one, right, it's got to start at the top. You've got to have the buy-in from the top. You can't change it from the middle out. You can't change it from the bottom up, right? When we're talking about changing the culture of an organisation and building cultural competency within an organisation, then it's got to be supported from the top. You've got to have a strategy. You've got to do like a bit of an audit, right? So last year, for example, I had a couple of companies ask me to come and do a cultural safety audit, right? And what that involved was me speaking to executives, me speaking to mid-level managers and supervisors, and then me speaking to people on the ground from different cultural backgrounds and predominantly Aboriginal staff as well, and then looked at how well was the organisation travelling in terms of being an organisation that was inclusive and respectful and provided cultural safety to everyone that was in it. So, and it's not a kind of off-the-shelf type of program. You've got to customise it to the organisation. So you have a plan, you've got to have a strategy. It takes time, right? But anything that works well takes time.
I hear that all the time. It's got to start at the top. The reason it's got to start at the top is because they're looking up to reflect, is the top doing that? And so many times you hear about this hypocrisy of this is what you've got to do, but the boss is doing something else, And I think that's really what it comes down to is there's a social aspect to it. It's like if you're going to lead us, then do it by example.
And they've also got to be open to it, right? There's no point saying you want to do it when you really don't want to do it,
So you work with a lot of young people today, and when you think of the next generation coming up, what is something that gives you hope about this next generation that's coming into the workforce, that's coming into leadership positions, in your view?
Well, I think number one, we're definitely seeing more females, and I think we're seeing people developing leadership qualities at a much younger age. So, for example, the opportunities that are out there now were out there when I was a younger person, I would have been happy, much happier. Happy, but I'd be even happier. The opportunities there to grow better. And so that's what I'm saying is that often you'll hear people say, women are still getting discriminated against and it's hard for this group and it's hard for that. Well, no, a lot of it's about your attitude, right? Stop not making the outside the barrier and look at the inside. What is it that you're not doing to move yourself ahead?
That's not to say that discrimination is okay or sexism is okay. You're just saying, what is it going to actually empower you to make a change, right? Yeah. And it kind of seems like that's what Christine has done is you looked outside and you're like, okay, what can I do to change this? And it seems like you've spent many years now putting these things in place. So it might be that because you've worked with these leaders, you see them developing leadership opportunities earlier. And that's something that you would love to have experienced at this point in your life. But it seems like you've done a lot to create that.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's really beautiful work that you're doing there. And I didn't realize how It just didn't resonate with me for whatever reason we initially connected about how deeply personal and passionate you were about this work until I looked in a little bit more deeply. As we were kind of closing the podcast, what's something that I didn't ask you about or something that I should have asked you about?
Probably talk a little bit more about the mind, body, the health side of things. So, but that would probably be, like you said, a whole nother podcast. So maybe I can come back.
It's such an easy equation, right? What you put into your body is going to generate your energy, your mindset, all that stuff. But there is a tie to leadership and kind of what we're talking about here, right? Yeah. How can you speak to that? If you're going to need a lot of energy, do you change anything in your diet? If you notice anything with leaders
yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. Part of that training that, where that's going to lead into is that basically, so I'll start off with the concept of the car, right? So you've got a normal car, you've got a four-wheel drive. You go to the petrol station with the four-wheel drive, you're not going to put unleaded petrol in it, right? So I would ask people this, why are you not going to put unleaded petrol in it? Well, and they'll say, well, because if I do that, it's going to break down. Right, but yet people continue to put stuff in their body that slows them down, stuffs up the engine, stuffs up the hard drive, right? They can't concentrate, and then they wonder why. And the solution is that if you want to be more productive, you want to have lots of energy, then you've got to think about what you're actually putting in your engine, which is your body, and you're the driver of your own vehicle. So if you want to control where you're going, get the right fuel, go to the right petrol station. That's probably all I've got time to say.
So let's say somebody listening to this has got to, they got to be extra energetic tomorrow. What are they doing with their diet today and perhaps tomorrow morning?
All right, so tomorrow morning they could probably skip breakfast, have a juice. One of the things I do in the morning is I have lemon and water. Because lemon kicks your metabolism up, gets you invigorated, it's good for your skin. And then, as a rule, don't eat till lunchtime, right? And if you've got a busy day and you need lots of energy, don't have things that are going to bog you down. So you want to keep off the carbs. You don't want to eat pasta. You don't want to eat rice. You want to have like chicken and salad or something like that. So it's about understanding what's going to fuel you up and what's going to bog you down. So if you did a bit of an experiment, one day you had chicken and salad for lunch, and the next day you go and have a pasta or some pizza, and then 2 hours later, how are you feeling after one day versus the other? And you'll find that the chicken and the salad keep you going all day long, whereas if you have the rice or the pasta or the pizza, 2 hours later you're going to feel like going to sleep, and you're probably not going to be very productive at all. Yeah, that's going to be the end result.
Well, there's a lot of passion in this in the holistic side of things. So I imagine this program that you're putting together would be pretty incredible thing to be a part of. So
yeah.
Do you have any kind of timeline of putting that together, or is it just an idea phase right now?
Well, no, I've pretty well got it together, and now I've just got to sort of go back and review it and fine-tune it. Is make it available face-to-face, but make it available online, because I don't think there's enough education out there.
Christine, how can people connect with your work or reach out if they want to collaborate or learn more?
Well, they can go to my website, and on my website there's a direct contact form. So on my website, there's a contact form, so you can contact me direct from the website, and that will come straight to my email. Right? And then I'm also on LinkedIn. That's obviously where you found me.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I really enjoyed our conversation today, and all this will be in the show notes, of course, if people are interested in checking out and working with Christine. But I really appreciate it. I think we'll probably have to do one maybe about the food at some point in time. We could probably spend hours talking about that.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to do that, because I'm passionate about that as well.
Well, I think our signal is deteriorating. I thank you so much for being on the Personal Success Podcast.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ever feel like you're working hard but not getting anywhere? Like you're chasing goals without a roadmap? Well, you're not alone. This is exactly why I created the Personal Success Planner, a 90-day fillable PDF designed to help high-achieving professionals get clear on what matters, break down their goals, and finally make real progress. It's not just a planner. It's a proven system for defining your version of success and staying focused every day. Start building the life you actually want without the burnout. Download your free copy at personalsuccessplanner.com. Your success starts with a plan. Plan to win.